Archaeologists have discovered a huge ancient city, known for their distinctive temples and cities which stood for centuries.
High in Kyrgyzstan's mountains, stone buildings, vanished cities, sacred peaks, and thousands of carvings sit in places that should have been too remote, too cold, or too exposed to matter. Yet for centuries, people kept returning. The real mystery is not whether a lost civilization existed here. It is why so many worlds passed through these mountains and left their deepest marks behind. The mountains that should have been empty. Kyrgyzstan looks, at first, like a place built to resist civilization. Its mountains rise in huge walls. Its high passes can be sealed by snow. Its valleys feel open one moment and completely trapped the next. The Tian Shan Range does not offer the kind of gentle landscape where ancient cities usually grow. It is severe, beautiful, difficult, and often unforgiving. And yet, hidden across this landscape are traces of people who did not treat the mountains as a barrier. They treated them as a doorway. That is the first mistake people make when they imagine ancient Kyrgyzstan. They picture it as the edge of everything, the empty space between China, Persia, the steppe, and the great settled cities of Central Asia. But the ruins tell a different story. Kyrgyzstan was not simply the edge, it was the pressure point, a place where empires, traders, nomads, monks, pilgrims, soldiers, and shepherds all had to negotiate with the same mountains. That is why the sights feel so strange. Tash Rabat stands in an alpine valley at around 3,200 meters, built of stone, with thick walls, domed rooms, and an interior that feels more like a hidden sanctuary than a roadside inn. Burana Tower rises in the Chui Valley as the surviving marker of Balasagun, a medieval city that once mattered enough to anchor power, trade, and learning. Saimaluu Tash holds thousands of petroglyphs high in the Fergana range, in a place no ordinary town could have survived. Sulaiman-Too rises above Osh, not as a building, but as a sacred mountain that gathered belief for millennia. Ak-Beshim, identified with ancient Suyab, lies lower and quieter now, but it once sat on roots where Turkic, Chinese, Sogdian, Buddhist, Christian, and Islamic worlds overlapped. Taken alone, each site is mysterious. Together they reveal something bigger. The lost civilization hidden in Kyrgyzstan's mountains may not have been one empire with one capital and one language. It may have been a corridor civilization, a world built around movement rather than permanence. People did not always come here to stay forever. They came to cross, to trade, to pray, to mark, to control, to hide, and to remember. That is why the ruins feel unfinished. We keep looking for the city, but the real civilization may have been the root. Tash Rabat, the stone building that doesn't fit. Tash Rabat is often called a caravanserai. That should make the mystery simple. A caravanserai was an inn for travelers. Merchants crossed dangerous routes. Animals needed rest. Goods needed protection. People needed shelter. A building like Tash Rabat could have served traders and pilgrims moving through the mountain corridor toward China. But the moment you actually examine it, the explanation starts to crack. Most caravanserais were built where traffic made sense. They usually sat near obvious routes, towns, water sources, or commercial nodes. They often had open courtyards where animals and goods could be managed. They were practical buildings designed around movement, storage, and exchange. Tash Rabat does not feel like that. It sits in a remote valley, high enough that winter would make travel brutal. Its stone walls seem less concerned with hospitality than survival. Its rooms are enclosed, small, and austere. The structure has a central hall and more than 30 domed chambers, but it lacks the open, breathing arrangement expected of a major trade inn. Walking through it, the feeling is not one of a busy commercial stop. It feels inward, quiet, almost secretive. That is where the theories begin. Some traditions describe Tash Rabat as a fortress. Others imagine it as a monastery or religious refuge. Some researchers have suggested that earlier foundations may lie beneath the visible medieval structure. Others have noted that Central Asia once held communities of different faiths, including Nestorian Christians, before Islam became dominant across much of the region. None of those explanations fully solves the problem. If it was only a caravanserai, why build it like a stone sanctuary in such a harsh location? If it was a monastery, why does its later Silk Road function seem so plausible? If it was a fortress, why does it feel so contained rather than militarily dominant? The most likely answer may be the least dramatic but the most interesting. Tash Rabat may have changed jobs. In a region shaped by shifting khanates, trade routes, migration, and religious change, a strong building in the mountains did not need one purpose forever. It could have been a refuge, then a religious site, then a caravan stop, then a defensive shelter, then a local landmark. Its survival may come from exactly that flexibility. That is what makes it so haunting. Tash Rabat was built strongly enough to outlive the people who could explain it. No inscription tells us who ordered it. No surviving dedication solves its purpose. The stonework suggests planning, skilled labor, and authority. But the building itself refuses to say whether that authority belonged to merchants, rulers, monks, or guardians of a mountain pass. And in that silence, Tash Rabat becomes a clue to the entire Kyrgyz mystery. The mountains did not reward weak structures or temporary ideas. If people built here, they built for endurance. They built for protection. They built because this place mattered enough to justify effort that made no sense for a casual stop. So the question is not only what was Tash Rabat, the better question is what kind of world needed a building like this at the roof of the route? Burana, the tower of a vanished city. Burana Tower tells the opposite story. Tash Rabat hides in the mountains. Burana stands in the open. It rises in the Chewy Valley near the ruins of ancient Balasagun, a city associated with the Kyrgyzstan state and the northern routes of the Silk Road. Today, the tower stands as the most visible survivor, but that is exactly what makes it unsettling. A city once existed here. People traded, prayed, governed, built walls, studied, and moved through a world connected far beyond the valley. Then, most of it disappeared. The tower remained. That image is powerful because it feels almost backwards. Cities are supposed to explain their monuments. Roads, houses, markets, mosques, schools, and walls should give a tower its context. At Burana, the context has been reduced to earthworks, scattered stones, fragments, and memory. The tower is believed to have served as a minaret, and its structure supports that idea. It has the vertical form, the internal ascent, and the monumental presence of Islamic architecture in Central Asia. But even here, the answer is incomplete. The surviving mosque foundation is not obvious in a way that satisfies every question. Earthquakes damaged the tower over centuries. Restoration changed parts of what modern visitors see. The surrounding city is more implied than visible. Burana is not only a tower, it is a witness after the collapse of its own world. The ruins around it include balbals, carved stone figures linked to earlier Turkic traditions of memorialization. These markers remind us that the site was not simply Islamic, urban, or Karakhanid. It was layered. Older steppe traditions, Silk Road urbanism, Turkic power, Islamic architecture, and local memory all overlap in the same landscape. That layering is essential. Ancient Kyrgyzstan was not a place where one culture arrived and erased everything before it. More often, meanings accumulated. A sacred place stayed sacred under a new name. A trade route remained useful under a new ruler. A city changed hands, religions, languages, and political importance, but kept its position because geography still mattered. Balasagun's decline remains uncertain. Earthquakes likely played a role. Shifting trade routes may have weakened it. Political change may have drained its importance. Environmental pressures may have altered the balance that made urban life possible. But none of these explanations alone fully captures the emotional mystery. How does a city, once important enough to be remembered, become a plain where one tower stands like a warning? The answer may be that cities on routes are powerful only while movement favors them. When the flow changes, even great places can fade. That idea connects Burana to the wider story. Kyrgyzstan's hidden civilization was not always built on permanent density. It was built on connection. Its sites lived when movement passed through them. They suffered when movement shifted away. That is why Burana still matters. It reminds us that the Silk Road was not one road. It was a network of choices, passes, valleys, risks, and opportunities. A city could become important because the world needed its position. Then it could vanish when the world found another path. Burana's mystery is not that a tower survived, it is that the city around it did not. Saimaluu Tash, the mountain that people kept returning to. If Tash Rabat is the mystery of shelter and Burana is the mystery of vanished urban power, Saimaluu Tash is the mystery of return. High in the Fergana range, thousands of petroglyphs are carved into dark stones, scattered across an alpine landscape. The site is difficult to reach. It is not an obvious place for a permanent settlement. There are no ordinary signs of daily life on the scale that would explain the number of images, and yet people returned for centuries. That is what makes Saimaluu Tash extraordinary. One carving could be an accident of passing. A few dozen could be a local tradition. But thousands of carvings across long periods suggest something deeper. This was not a place people used once. It was a place they remembered. The images include animals, hunters, carts, solar forms, geometric marks, and human figures. Some are realistic, others are abstract. Some may reflect pastoral life. Others suggest ritual, cosmology, or symbolic systems that are now impossible to fully recover. The carvings also overlap. Newer images sometimes cut across older ones, not completely erasing them, but adding another layer. That matters because it suggests the site was not treated like a finished artwork. It was a living surface. People returned to participate in a tradition already older than themselves. That may be the key to understanding it. Modern viewers often ask, what does this symbol mean? But at Saimaluu Tash, meaning may not have lived only in the symbols. It may have lived in the act of carving, the journey upward, the arrival at a set-apart basin, the choosing of stone, the cutting into dark patina, the leaving of a mark where ancestors had left theirs. In other words, Saimaluu Tash may have functioned less like a message board and more like a ritual of belonging. That also explains why its remoteness is not a flaw. The difficulty may have been part of the point. Places of worship are often set apart. Mountains, caves, springs, peaks, and high valleys become sacred because they feel different from daily life. They require effort. They change the body before they change the mind. A person who reaches Saimaluu Tash has already left ordinary space behind. This is where the lost civilization angle becomes more subtle. The people who carved Saimaluu Tash may not have built stone cities there. They may not have left palaces or written archives, but they left a memory system powerful enough to survive weather, migration, and changing beliefs. That is civilization too, just not the kind that always appears in schoolbooks. A city says, "We ruled here." A petroglyph field says, "We returned here." That difference matters. Saimaluu Tash reveals a society that did not always need walls to organize meaning. Pastoral peoples moving with animals could still have sacred geographies, shared symbols, seasonal roots, and inherited memories. Their world was mobile, but not rootless. The carvings prove that movement and meaning can coexist. That may be the biggest misunderstanding about nomadic and mountain cultures. Outsiders often mistake mobility for lack of complexity, but mobile societies can carry maps in memory, religion in landscape, and history in repeated action. Saimaluu Tash is one of the great stone records of that reality. It is not a city hidden in the mountains. It is something stranger, a sacred archive without walls. Sulaiman-Too, the sacred mountain that outlived every empire. Sulaiman-Too rises above Osh in a completely different way. Unlike Tash Rabat or Saimaluu Tash, it is not hidden far from settlement. It stands directly beside one of Central Asia's oldest urban centers, visible from the city and tied to routes that pass through the Burana Valley. UNESCO describes it as a sacred mountain dominating the valley and forming the backdrop to Osh, with worship places, caves, petroglyphs, and traditions that blend pre-Islamic and Islamic belief. That makes Sulaiman-Too one of the most important pieces of this puzzle. It shows how a natural formation can become a monument without being built. The mountain's power comes from presence. It rises from the plain with 5 peaks, visible, memorable, and impossible to ignore. For travelers, it was a landmark. For pilgrims, it became sacred. For local communities, it became part of daily orientation. People did not need to construct a massive temple to make the mountain meaningful. The mountain already commanded attention. Over time, people added to it. They carved into caves. They created paths. They used shrines. They attached healing traditions to particular places. They connected the mountain to Islamic stories while older practices remained underneath. The result is not a single religious site, but a sacred landscape built through repetition. That is why Sulaiman-Too matters so much to the original twist. It proves that Kyrgyzstan's hidden civilization was not only about trade or settlement. It was also about continuity. Empires changed, religions changed, cities rose and faded, but the mountain kept absorbing meaning. That kind of survival is different from Burana's survival. Burana survived as a ruin after its city faded. Sulaiman-Too survived because people kept using it. Its sacredness did not freeze in the past. It adapted. It became pre-Islamic and Islamic, ancient and living, natural and cultural at the same time. That is why it is so difficult to explain archaeologically. If you look for one foundation date, one builder, one inscription, or one original purpose, the site resists you. Its meaning was not created in one moment. It accumulated over thousands of acts: climbing, praying, carving, touching, naming, telling stories, returning. Sulaiman-Too shows that some places become powerful not because one ruler orders them built, but because generations agree, quietly and repeatedly, that the place matters. That is a form of civilization we often underestimate. We understand cities because they leave walls. We understand kings because they leave monuments. We understand empires because they leave coins, inscriptions, and battle records. But sacred landscapes leave a different kind of evidence: footpaths, smoothed rock, caves, petroglyphs, shrines, repeated use, stories that change but do not disappear. In that sense, Sulaiman-Too may be the clearest answer to the title's question. Why was this hidden civilization there? Because the mountains themselves were part of the system. They were not empty background. They guided travel, shaped belief, created landmarks, protected routes, and gave people places to attach memory. Ak-Beshim and the city beneath the silence. Then there is Ak-Beshim, identified with ancient Suyab. This site is quieter than the others at first glance. It does not rise like Sulaiman-Too. It does not stand with one dramatic tower like Burana. It does not overwhelm with thousands of visible carvings like Saimaluu Tash. Much of its importance lies beneath the ground, in walls, foundations, and the careful work of archaeology. But historically, Suyab was crucial. It sat on the Northern Silk Road network, connected to the Chui Valley and the wider routes between China and Central Asia. UNESCO's Silk Road's routes network of Chang'an-Tianshan corridor includes the city of Suyab, site of Ak-Beshim, as one of its components. That alone changes how we should see Kyrgyzstan. This was not wilderness waiting for history to arrive from somewhere else. It was part of a corridor linking major centers of power and exchange across Eurasia. Diplomats, merchants, monks, armies, and envoys passed through these routes. Ideas traveled with them. Religions traveled. Technologies traveled. Languages traveled. Art styles traveled. Suyab was one of the places where those movements became urban life. Historical sources connect Suyab with Turkic power and Tang Chinese influence. Archaeology points toward walls, residential quarters, administrative spaces, and religious diversity. Buddhist, Christian, Zoroastrian, and Islamic traces across the wider corridor remind us that Silk Road cities were not culturally simple, they were meeting points. That is why Ak-Beshim is so important to the storyline. It gives the mountain mystery a political center. Tash Rabat shows shelter and secrecy. Burana shows a vanished city and tower. Saimaluu Tash shows sacred return. Sulaiman-Too shows living mountain worship. Ak-Beshim shows that these roots were tied to real states, real diplomacy, real religious exchange, and real urban planning. But it also shares the same problem as the other sites. So much is gone. The city's importance is clearer in records than in the visible landscape. Its walls are low. Its remains are fragmentary. Its story has to be reconstructed through excavation, comparison, and text. The result is a place that feels half present, as if the earth remembers more than it is willing to show. That is the central feeling of Kyrgyzstan's archaeological landscape. Every site tells you enough to know it mattered, but not enough to close the case. And maybe that is because we keep demanding the wrong kind of answer. We ask, who built the lost civilization? But Kyrgyzstan's ancient world was not built by one people alone. It was layered by many. Pastoral communities, Turkic powers, Sogdian merchants, Islamic dynasties, Buddhist monks, Christian communities, local rulers, travelers, and generations whose names never entered written history. We ask, why was it there? But the answer changes depending on the site. To control a route, to shelter movement, to worship a mountain, to mark a seasonal return, to govern a valley, to connect China, Central Asia, and the steppe. The real answer is all of them. Kyrgyzstan's lost civilization was there because the mountains made it necessary. The mystery of Kyrgyzstan's mountains is not that people built in impossible places. It is that those impossible places were logical to them. Kyrgyzstan's mountains do not reveal one lost civilization. They reveal many worlds passing through the same impossible landscape, leaving towers, carvings, sacred peaks, and unanswered questions behind. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment which site feels most mysterious. Tash Rabat Burana, Saimaluu Tash, Sulaiman-Too, or Ak-Beshim.